The age of nuclear weapons has significantly affected many areas of human life. The political situation has changed, the environmental situation changed, and sometimes people's lives changed. The USSR and the United States constantly fought for the right to be called the leading military power, and for this purpose they were developing the most advanced weapons, including nuclear weapons. Ready weapons had to be tested somewhere, and for this purpose, closed testing grounds were created, where the tests took place. Except that these were not isolated pieces of planet Earth. It was living nature, which was directly connected to the entire surrounding atmosphere. And all the consequences of nuclear explosions were reflected not only on the environment, but also on the people who lived nearby. One of such test sites was the Semipalatinsk test site. It was the first and largest nuclear test site in the USSR. Its unofficial name is 2. At present, the territory where the Semipalatinsk test site was located belongs to Kazakhstan. The polygon had an area of 18,300 square kilometers. Previously, there was a closed city of Kurchatov, so it was named in honor of the famous Soviet physicist. And before that, the polygon had the names Moscow 400, Semipalatinsk 21, Bereg, Konicheny Station. The test site was used from 1949 to 1989. More than 400 nuclear tests were conducted there. The first atomic explosion occurred at the Semipalatinsk test site in August 1949. It was devastating. Everything within 5 kilometers was destroyed. This is industrial enterprises, military equipment, residential buildings. All of this was deliberately built before the explosion to realize its destructive power. All the ground in the epicenter of the explosion and its vicinity became black and charred. After the first test, regular inspections of the atomic charges began to take place at the test site. In August 1953, the Semipalatinsk test site tested the RDS-6 thermonuclear charge. The charge itself was placed on a tower 30 meters above the ground. After the tests, part of the test site was exposed to the strongest radioactive contamination. In November 1955, a super-powerful Soviet hydrogen bomb was tested at the Semipalatinsk test site. Its developer was academician Sakharov. The bomb was dropped from an airplane from a height of about 2 kilometers. Radioactive fallout fell on the test site itself and in the villages that were not far from it. But unsuspecting people continued to live in these areas. They harvested crops from contaminated land, ate meat from contaminated animals, collected and consumed contaminated forest products. All this, of course, had a negative impact on their health. But at that time, people could not understand why more and more sick people appeared in the vicinity of Semipalatinsk polygon. And it was impossible to get information from anywhere because all information about the tests was classified. All tests conducted at the Semipalatinsk test site can be divided into 2 periods. From 1949 to 1961, tests of nuclear explosions in the atmosphere were conducted here, and from 1961 to 1989, underground nuclear explosions were tested. The first underground nuclear explosion was carried out on October 11, 1961. The Adit B1 was laid in the rock massif of the test site. It had a length of 380 meters, and the explosion chamber was placed at a depth of 125 meters. In order for the charge to move along the adit, a rail track was built. A concrete wall was built 40 meters away from the place where the explosion was planned. It had a hole in it that resembled a pipe. The wall was necessary to expel gamma radiation. It was to be read by special sensors. All the data collected was transmitted to the command center. It was located 5 kilometers from the adit. Near the epicenter of the explosion placed experimental animals. Their remains were supposed to determine the destructive power of the underground explosion and how it affects the general condition of the organism of living beings. The nuclear explosion was triggered from the command post via radio signals. At the moment when the bomb detonated, the surface of the mountain located in the area of the explosion rose 4 meters. All radioactive products remained inside. Specialists, when they entered the adit, saw that almost all the structures remained intact, and the site itself was not even found radioactive contamination. The explosion was very powerful. Even 10 kilometers away, the earth tremors were felt. The residents living in these areas thought that an earthquake had started, since they knew nothing about the tests. The population shared their impressions with each other about how the earth shook. They came up with theories about what might have happened. But no one realized that they were in danger. No one knew they were at risk, and naturally no one guessed what future consequences awaited. As a result of this experiment, scientists found that the nuclear explosion, produced on the ground and underground, has significant differences. No cracks were formed through which large volumes of gas would escape. And in the adit itself, there was no need to use an insulating gas mask. Even in the epicenter of the explosion, after several hours, radioactive gases began to disappear. But such results did not rule out the fact that local residents were contaminated. Some of them were exposed to serious doses of radiation. No one even suspected of being seriously infected. After some time, the consequences gradually began to manifest themselves. People living in the vicinity of the Semipalatinsk test site began to notice various ailments. Some began to lose their hair, others lost their teeth. Some began to have very serious health problems. Sometimes they led to the development of cancer, and in extreme cases, even premature death. But there are no official statistics on this, because all the trials were highly classified. Doctors could not always determine what exactly happened to a person. Lack of accurate diagnosis led to inappropriate treatment, and the person finally lost his health and sometimes his life. But the trials continued, and those who were lucky enough not to have been infected before were once again in the danger zone. They had every chance of being exposed to radioactive contamination. The underground nuclear bomb test in 1961 was by no means the last. The inhabitants were in constant danger. They already realized that something wrong was going on. They guessed that some secret experiments were being conducted, because of which not only the atmosphere was suffering, but also their health. That is why they became increasingly concerned about high morbidity and mortality rates. But all the facts were silenced by the Soviet authorities. And even if protests reached the leadership of the Soviet Union, no concrete measures were taken. The safety of the whole country was more important than the health of the population of a certain territory. The last major tests at the Semipalatinsk test site were conducted in 1989. According to the results of the February tests, the radiation background was off the scale. As a result, local residents went to a rally. They sent appeals to all authorities, including the UN. And the international anti-nuclear movement, Nevada Semipalatinsk, appeared. It played a huge role in stopping nuclear weapons testing, and the Semipalatinsk test site itself was closed. Not only in the USSR, but also in many other countries, people came out to protest. They expressed their dissatisfaction with the nuclear tests being conducted. The inhabitants of planet Earth realized that their authorities were endangering their health and lives, and they did not want to put up with it any longer. Therefore, the governments of many countries were forced to abandon such tests. To this day, some areas where the Semipalatinsk test site used to be located have an elevated level of radiation. The territory of the landfill itself is not protected, and before 2006, it was not even on the maps. Semipalatinsk polygon is the only place in the world where people continue to live and even engage in cattle breeding after nuclear tests. Tourists often go there, even in groups. It has been recognized that more than 1 million people were affected by the nuclear tests at the Semipalatinsk test site. In 2005, the Parliament of Kazakhstan decided to fence the borders of the test site with concrete pillars. This decision was influenced by the public. In 2008, engineering protection began to be created for the areas that are most contaminated. It is forbidden for people and animals to move around them. Even after all these years, the landfill remains a dangerous place. The tests conducted there over several decades have left a significant mark and significantly affected the local ecology. The Semipalatinsk test site is a vivid example of the dangers of nuclear weapons and how important it is to prevent their use.